The sun was sliding down the red hills of Dustruck County when Samuel Dyer finished tending to his cattle. He was a quiet man, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of rancher who preferred the company of horses to people. Folks in town said he spoke less than the wind in a dead canyon. But when he did, his voice carried the weight of truth. That evening, as the horizon burned gold and crimson, Samuel wiped the sweat off his brow and walked toward the small wooden house he called home. His maid, Clara Reeves, had been with him for just over 3 months, a timid young woman who never raised her eyes and kept mostly to herself. When Samuel opened the front door, he noticed something odd. Clara was in the kitchen, scrubbing the floor, but her movement was uneven. She winced every time she shifted her left leg. "You all right, Clara?" he asked in his low, gravelly tone. She startled, the bucket rattling beside her. "Why, yes, sir. Just slipped on the porch this morning." But Samuel wasn't convinced. The Old West taught men to read more than words. They read eyes, silences, and the things people didn't say. He saw fear in hers. "Let me take a look," he offered, stepping closer. "No, please," she blurted out, backing away so sharply that her heel hit the cabinet. The sound echoed through the small house like a shot. Samuel raised his hands calmly. "All right then. Just be careful next time." He walked out to the porch, lit a cigarette, and watched the desert fade into night. But his mind kept circling back to that limp, the way she flinched, not from pain, but from something darker. Later that night, when the coyotes began to howl across the plains, Samuel heard a door creak open. He stepped quietly to the window and saw Clara slipping out into the moonlight, limping toward the barn. In her hand, she clutched a small satchel, and something metallic glimmered briefly inside it. Samuel followed, silent as the desert wind. When he reached the barn, he stopped just before the door. He could hear her whispering, not to herself, but to someone. "It's all right now," she said softly. "I've got what you asked for." Samuel's heart pounded. There was no one else on the ranch, or there shouldn't have been. He peeked through a crack in the wood and saw a shadow moving behind the hay bales. The figure stepped forward, a man, dirty and wounded, with a sheriff's star half buried under his torn coat. Blood streaked his arm. "Did anyone see you?" the man asked hoarsely. "No," Clara replied, glancing nervously toward the house. "He doesn't suspect a thing." Samuel froze. The he was him. The rancher backed away quietly, his mind racing. Why was there a wounded sheriff hiding in his barn? And what had Clara stolen for him? The next morning, Samuel acted like nothing had happened. But as he poured his coffee, he noticed something missing from the mantel. His father's old revolver, and that's when he knew the quiet days on his ranch were over. By the time the first light of dawn swept across Dustruck County, Samuel Dyer had already made up his mind. He wasn't a man who liked meddling in other people's business, but this wasn't ordinary business. A stranger was hiding in his barn, a wounded man wearing a sheriff's star, and Clara, his quiet maid, was helping him. Samuel moved quietly through the house. The old floorboards creaked beneath his boots as he reached for his rifle, the one his father had used during the war. His revolver was still missing. Outside, the land stretched wide and still. The morning air smelled of dust and sagebrush. The ranch seemed peaceful, but Samuel's instincts said otherwise. Something dark had crawled into his quiet life. He stepped into the barn, careful not to make a sound. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open. Inside, shafts of sunlight cut through the cracks in the walls, slicing through the shadows. The place was empty. The hay was scattered, and there were fresh footprints near the back, one large, one small, leading toward the creek. Samuel knelt, touching the prints. The larger ones had blood smeared in them. The sheriff wasn't dead yet, but he was weak. Just then, Clara's voice came from behind him. "You shouldn't be here, Mr. Dyer." Samuel turned slowly. She stood in the doorway, pale as morning frost, her hands trembling. "I should be asking you the same thing," he said evenly. "What's going on here, Clara? Who's that man?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't answer. "Tell me the truth," Samuel pressed, his tone low and steady. "You owe me that much." Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's Sheriff Coleman, or at least, he was." Samuel frowned. "Was?" Clara nodded. "They shot him. Men from Silver Creek, outlaws. They raided the town, burned half of it down. He tried to stop them, but they turned on him. He barely made it out alive." Samuel's grip on his rifle tightened. "So you brought him here?" "I didn't have a choice," she said. "He saved my life once. I owed him everything. When I saw him bleeding outside town, I couldn't just leave him." Samuel sighed. "You should have told me." "I was going to," Clara whispered. "But those men, they're looking for him. If they find out he's here, they'll kill us both." Just then, a sound cut through the silence, a distant rumble of hooves. Samuel stepped to the barn door and peered out across the plains. 3 riders were coming fast, dust trailing behind them. Clara's face went white. "It's them." Samuel looked at her, then back at the horizon. The riders were armed. One carried a rifle across his saddle. Another wore a black hat that glinted in the sun. "Get the sheriff out of here," Samuel said firmly. "There's a cave by the ridge, near the old mines. Take him there and stay low." "But what about you?" Clara asked. Samuel checked his rifle, chambering around with calm precision. "I'll buy you time." As she hurried out the back, Samuel took position behind the corral fence, the old boards creaking beneath his weight. The riders drew closer, the sound of their hooves pounding like thunder through the valley. He didn't know who they were yet, bounty hunters, outlaws, or something worse. But he knew one thing for certain: the quiet rancher was about to make a lot of noise. The thunder of hooves drew nearer, shaking the quiet morning air. Samuel Dyer steadied his breath behind the corral fence, eyes fixed on the horizon. Dust swirled in the distance as 3 riders came into view, hard-faced men, the kind used to killing without asking questions. They reined their horses to a stop just outside the ranch gate. The man in front wore a long black duster and a matching hat, his face half hidden behind a bandana. A rifle hung from his saddle, and a silver spur glinted on his boot. The man called out, his voice rough and lazy. "Ain't no trouble here, friend. Just looking for someone." Samuel rose slowly, resting the rifle on the fence rail. "You're a long way from Silver Creek," he said evenly. The man chuckled. "Guess word travels fast. You heard what happened down there?" "Bits and pieces," Samuel replied. "Heard the sheriff got himself shot." The man's grin widened beneath the bandana. "That so? Then maybe you've seen him, Sheriff Coleman. Fella's got a bullet in his side and a bounty on his head." Samuel frowned. "He's the law," the man corrected. Now he's a thief and a killer. Took something that wasn't his. We're just here to collect. Samuel's heart tightened. Clara's words from the barn echoed in his mind. He saved my life once. Something about this didn't sit right. Can't say I've seen him, Samuel said finally. Only thing out here's cattle and dust. The man stared at him for a long moment, then swung off his horse. The other two followed. Mind if we take a look around? I do mind, Samuel replied, voice steady but cold. Private property. The man smiled thinly. We ain't the kind to ask twice. He took a step forward, and that's when Samuel's rifle clicked. The sound froze the air. Next step you take, Samuel said, you'll be eaten dirt. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Even the wind seemed to stop. Then one of the riders laughed, low and cruel. You got guts, old man. Got a good aim too, Samuel said. The standoff hung like a taut rope. Then, without warning, a gunshot rang out, not from Samuel's rifle, but from the hills behind the ranch. One of the riders yelped and dropped, clutching his shoulder. Get down. The man in black shouted. They dove for cover, bullets slicing through the dry air. Samuel ducked behind the fence as a second shot cracked. He spotted movement near the ridge. Clara. She was holding Samuel's old revolver, the one she'd taken from the mantel, firing wild but determined. Damn fool girl, Samuel muttered, returning fire to keep the riders pinned. The outlaws scrambled for their horses, cursing. The leader glared at Samuel. This ain't over, rancher. You're ridden into something you don't understand. With that, they galloped off into the dust, leaving one man bleeding in the dirt. Samuel lowered his rifle, heart pounding. When Clara reached him, breathless and shaking, he grabbed her arm. You should have stayed hidden. They would have killed you, she cried. Samuel sighed, glancing toward the wounded man groaning in the dust. Maybe. But now we've got a bigger problem. She followed his gaze. What do we do with him? Samuel looked out toward the hills, where the sun was climbing higher, lighting up the empty land. We make him talk, he said, and we find out what really happened in Silver Creek. The wounded outlaw lay in the shade of the corral, sweat dripping from his brow. His name, as Samuel soon learned, was Rafe Harlan, one of the Silver Creek gang. Clara stood a few steps back, still holding the revolver, her hands trembling. Samuel knelt beside Rafe, his voice low and calm. You got two choices, son. You tell me what happened in Silver Creek, or I let the buzzards do the asking. Rafe coughed, his face pale beneath the dust. You think you're some kind of lawman, rancher? No, Samuel said, but I've buried plenty of men who crossed the wrong line. The outlaw's grin faltered. He glanced toward Clara, then back at Samuel. You got no idea what that sheriff's done. Then enlighten me, Samuel said, cocking his rifle just enough to make his point. Rafe spat blood into the dirt. Sheriff Coleman wasn't the man everyone thought. He ran Silver Creek like it was his own gold mine, took money from every saloon, every ranch, every outlaw he could threaten. Then he got greedy. Clara shook her head fiercely. That's a lie, Rafe sneered. Is it? He robbed the Union Bank himself, killed 2 guards, said he'd blame it on us if we didn't play along. Samuel studied the man's eyes. He'd seen liars before, men who could spin a tale smoother than whiskey. But something about this one felt off. Why would Clara help him then? Samuel asked. Rafe laughed weakly. Maybe she don't know who he really is. Or maybe she does. Clara stepped forward, furious. Sheriff Coleman saved my brother from a lynching. He risked his badge for us. You're twisting the truth. Rafe's grin turned cruel. Maybe he just wanted to own your family's ranch. Samuel stood, his jaw tightening. That's enough. He turned to Clara. Where's Coleman now? In the cave, she said quietly. Like you told me. Good, Samuel said. He slung his rifle over his shoulder. We're going to hear his side of the story. Before leaving, he tied Rafe's hands and secured him in the barn. Don't run off, he said flatly. You'll just die tired. The trail to the ridge was rough and steep, cutting through dry brush and rocks. By the time they reached the cave, the sun was high and the heat pressed down like iron. Inside, in the dim light, Sheriff Coleman lay propped against a rock, his shirt soaked with blood. He looked weaker than before, but his eyes still burned with authority. Mr. Dyer, he rasped, I reckon you've got questions. Samuel crossed his arms. Plenty. Start token. Coleman sighed. Silver Creek wasn't what it looked like. The gang ran everything. Rafe, Dalton, and their boss, Tully Grant. They owned the mines, the law, even the judge. I tried to bring em in, but they set me up. Said I robbed the bank, shot the guards. When I fought back, they burned the town. He winced, clutching his wound. They put a bounty on me to make sure no one would listen. Samuel's face hardened. So they're hunting you to finish the job. Coleman nodded. And if they ain't stopped, they'll do the same to this whole county. Clara's eyes shimmered. We can't just let them win. Samuel looked out through the cave mouth toward the endless plains. The wind was picking up again, carrying dust and trouble with it. No, he said, finally. We end this, tonight. The sun dipped below the hills, turning the sky over Dustrock County into a sea of fire and shadow. The air was thick with the promise of blood. Samuel Dyer stood on his porch, rifle in hand, watching the wind twist through the dry grass. Inside, Clara packed supplies, while Sheriff Coleman, pale but determined, strapped on his holster with a wince of pain. It was time. They'll come for you, Samuel said quietly. You sure you can ride? Coleman nodded. I've been running long enough. Time I ride back and finish this. Clara stepped forward. You don't have to face them alone. Samuel looked at her, the weight of the moment settling in his eyes. We started this together. We end it the same way. As the last light vanished, the three rode toward Silver Creek, a ghost town, lit only by the flicker of campfires and lanterns. Smoke hung in the air, and the echo of laughter drifted from the old saloon. The gang was there, celebrating too early. Samuel reined in his horse at the edge of town. Coleman, you take the left. Clara, stay behind me. Don't shoot unless you have to. Coleman gave a tight nod. They'll be inside. Tully Grant never could resist whiskey and company. The three dismounted and crept through the shadows. The saloon doors creaked in the wind. From inside came the sound of boots, cards shuffling, and rough laughter. Samuel pushed the doors open. The room froze. 5 men turned, eyes narrowing. At the far table sat Tully Grant, tall, heavy-set, his vest lined with gold watch chains. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, Tully drawled, standing up, if it ain't the ghost himself. Sheriff Coleman thought you'd be buzzard bones by now. Coleman stepped forward, his hand hovering near his revolver. You set me up, Tully. You burned my town. Tully shrugged. Silver Creek belonged to me before you came sniffing around. Law don't mean much when a man's got gold in his pocket. Law means everything, Coleman said coldly. The room went silent, and then, all at once, it exploded into gunfire. Samuel dove behind the bar, wood splintering around him. Clara cried out, firing back, toward the stairs, where two gunmen appeared. Coleman dropped one man with a single, perfect shot, though the effort nearly sent him collapsing. Tully kicked over a table, shouting, "Kill 'em all." Smoke filled the air. Samuel popped up, fired twice, and took down another outlaw. The room thundered with noise, glass shattering, bullets whining off walls, men shouting curses. Then, as the gunfire thinned, Tully tried to slip out the back. Samuel saw him, sprinted through the haze, and tackled him into the alley. They hit the ground hard, fists flying. You should have stayed quiet, rancher, Tully snarled, reaching for his pistol. Samuel grabbed the barrel and twisted, the gun firing harmlessly into the dirt. He slammed Tully against the wall, his face inches away. You brought hell to my land. Now I'm sending it back. He struck once, clean and hard. Tully crumpled, unconscious. When Samuel turned, Clara and Coleman were standing in the doorway, both breathing hard. The saloon behind them was silent, the rest of the gang either dead or fled. Coleman leaned against the wall, his badge glinting faintly under the moonlight. Justice, he said softly, finally found its way home. Samuel looked at the sheriff, then at Clara, who was staring at the horizon, where the first hint of dawn was breaking. "Reckon District's gonna need a new lawman," Samuel said. Coleman smiled faintly. "Reckon it's got one already." Samuel didn't answer. He just looked toward the east, where the light chased the dark away, and for the first time in years, the rancher felt the peace of a man who'd done what needed doing.